My kid is bipolar. My kid is bipolar. And I'll be like, what does that mean, bipolar? So that is woefully incorrect. So, I mean, that could be true, right? But I don't know if you want to do that. I don't understand quite what that is. That was actually pretty good. That was good. We're doing TikTok reacts, chat. Shall we move on?
People are gonna wish that at some point they'd taken a little time to care just a little goddamn bit! I wanna roll with him up.
Okay, so this is actually somewhat... I want to talk about this for a second. So, you know, sometimes, like, we think about this and, like, people will say, like, oh, this person is bipolar. Like, they're so distressed. They want to, you know, be... What did this person say? They want to be,
Roll
like...
with him up. People are gonna wish...
Me having a whole breakdown, shaking on the floor and wishing I was... I'm assuming that's... It would have edited out dead, which is why they're saying that, but... So this is actually pretty common, where sometimes when we have emotional lability is the term. So we're going to talk for a second about bipolar and emotional lability. So a lot of people will come to me, especially like parents, and they'll say like, my kid is bipolar. My kid is bipolar. And I'll be like, what does that mean, bipolar? And they'll say like, well, 1 minute they're like happy and the next minute they're like raging, right? They're happy when they're playing their video game and the second I unplug the internet, they're like raging at me. So this is actually relatively common, where sometimes when people have intense internal distress, they'll think that they're bipolar, but really what it is emotional lability. And what we see is that you'll have this intense distress, and then they'll even use suicidal language, but it's not really like suicidality. This is where you have to really evaluate them, right? So when I'm doing an evaluation, these are the kinds of questions that I'll ask. I'll be like, when you say you want to be dead, like, what does that mean? Does that mean that you want to not feel this way anymore, and that's why you're saying that you want to be dead? Or you like don't enjoy life and you despair and, you know, like there's nothing to look forward to? And then oftentimes if you start to tunnel down into those questions, what you'll find is that when people are very emotionally distressed, the best way we know how to communicate that is with like suicidal kind of language. And I know it's kind of weird, but it's sort of like, I don't feel good on the inside. Like that doesn't mean anything to anyone, right? If you walk around and you say, I don't feel good on the inside, like, how do people respond to that? No one knows, okay, did you eat something bad? Like that's what people are going to say, right? Whereas if you say like, I don't want to be alive anymore, people understand that that is language that's used to communicate distress. You're trying to tell people, hey, I feel really terrible. And then oftentimes when you have people who have emotional lability as opposed to bipolar disorder, you'll sort of see that people will bounce back pretty quickly. And so that's kind of common. Now, sometimes this can be a sign of a psychiatric illness. I mean, if you're having suicidal thoughts, you should absolutely go see someone. But bipolar disorder is, generally speaking, characterized by periods of time, like weeks of feeling a particular way. It's not like feeling this way 1 minute and this way the next minute. That's really more emotional lability. I don't understand quite what that is. So this person, I guess this means, okay, intrusive thoughts. I'm confused. So y'all have to explain to me what this person is trying to convey. Oh, brain is overheating from stress? Yeah, so this too, I mean, hopefully we'll have something for y'all soon about this, but I think somewhere along the way, we've lost control of our minds. I don't know how else to say this, but so, you know, like we control our bodies, right? Like I can do this. I can do this. I can do stuff with my body. But when it comes to like our mind, we've like lost control of it. And I think honestly, technology is making it worse, because what's happening with technology is when I feel bad about stuff now, what do? I don't force my mind to do something. I use technology as a crutch to make it do something. So when I'm bored, for example, like if I'm trying to study, I can't restrain my attention on the object of study. Why is that? It's because when my mind gets bored, I'll go watch something, and then it removes the need for my mind to be forced to do a particular thing. Does that make sense? It's like we used to need to force our mind to do things, but now with like technology, it's like it's so easy for our mind to be like this. Like, I mean, just, right? And so what we end up doing is we just end up turning to, like, when we're mentally distressed like that, what do you think this person does? They end up watching something or being on TikTok or whatever, right? And then once you create that sense of distraction, you play a video game, then the mind kind of calms down. And then when you stop doing that sort of thing, it starts up again. And so then you end up in a situation where you kind of get like this crutch, where you're sort of dependent on technology for managing like the overheating thoughts and emotions in your head. Because you're using technology, you're using something like an engaging YouTube video or a dopaminergic meme or a very intense like horror video game to calm your mind down and create certain states of mind for you. And the more that you use the technology to create this state of mind within you, the more dependent you become on it because you don't know how to make it on your own. And once you get to the point where like you've really lost a lot of that capacity, then you end up like this, where your thoughts are just all over the place. Dangerous.
Mama, I caught the ADHD. It's not contagious, Jimothy, but why do you say that? Because this guy on TikTok is relatable. Jimothy, don't go self-diagnosing on TikTok. Why not, Mama? Because everyone on planet Earth will experience an ADHD symptom once in a while, because we all have executive functions. The distinct difference is whether those symptoms happen once in a while or they intrude on your daily life and are reoccurring more often. I thought everyone's ADHD was different, Mama. Well, this is just based on the current criteria in the DSM-5, which is controversial within itself. So how do I know if I truly got it? Well, Jimothy, that TikToker has a link in his bio to a self-screening test, so you can fill that out. We'll talk about it, and then we can go to your doctor. Thanks, Mama.
That was actually pretty good. That was good. It's more nuanced than I was expecting. Yeah, so, okay, let's talk about this for a second. So first thing is that this is like a pretty accurate representation. So remember that ADHD, so like, really good actually. So a lot of people are gonna have symptoms of ADHD, right? And so this is the problem with sort of like the Google MD, which is that like if you look for a particular symptom, you know, you can sort of find it as part of an illness. But the key thing about like true diagnosis is that it's not just whether you check that box, it's like it's a constellation of different things. It's the severity. How often do you check that box? This person's good. He talks about, you know, how it's like it's everyone's going to experience stuff occasionally. It's about the consistency of what you experience, which is excellent. They also managed to talk about how the DSM is controversial, which it absolutely is. And if you all are not aware of what he's talking about, so let's just talk about the DSM for a second. So a long time ago, there were a group of researchers who were trying to figure out how are we going to make the research that we do uniform. So if I'm making an antidepressant medication and you're making an antidepressant medication, how do we determine whether the people that are coming into our study are depressed or not depressed? That's the main question they had. And what they came up with was something called the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. And they said, when we're going to study people who have depression, these are the criteria we're going to use. This is the line that we're going to draw. People on this side of the line have depression or okay for the study. People on that side of the line don't have depression or not okay for the study. But it's a research tool. It's a set of inclusion criteria for a scientific study, which is different, right? It's just like who gets in the study. It doesn't necessarily mean they're depressed or not depressed. It's a way of creating uniformity between studies. So along comes the DSM. It's fantastic. I think it's a really good innovation. But it's not a clinical tool. It's a research tool. Then what happens is like insurance companies kind of come along and they're sort of trying to figure out, okay, how do we tell if this person is like getting treatment or not getting treatment, if they're doing a good job or not doing a good job? And remember that these research studies are tracking certain symptoms within this population. So now insurance starts using the DSM to determine whether they're going to pay you to see this person or not. Because if the person does not meet DSM criteria, we're not going to pay you. And then suddenly like it becomes like part of a clinical treatment. And now it's being used clinically. But the key thing about the DSM, it was never designed as a clinical tool. It was not designed for humans. It was designed as a research tool for inclusion criteria. So that creates a lot of the controversy, because this is the tricky thing about the DSM is you can meet DSM criteria and have the disease, or meet DSM criteria and not have the disease, because it's checkboxes. The flip of it is also true, where you can not meet DSM criteria, so you don't check enough boxes, and you still have the disease. And you can not meet DSM criteria, and you can have, and you can not have the disease too. So it's kind of interesting because it's not like a gold standard. It's like a set of, 5 or 7 or 9 or 12 different criteria. And if you have like 5 out of the 9 criteria for major depressive disorder, you get diagnosed. And so this is kind of like really common, and I think it's actually a good representation of how it's really easy to see something, relate to it, and then want to give yourself a diagnosis. But that's not really appropriate. And I actually think this is good. What this person is saying is that, by all means, fill out a screening questionnaire and then go talk to an actual doctor, because that's what clinical diagnosis is all about. This is pretty good. So it says nothing. No, it doesn't say nothing. This is important. What it does is it's really a research tool. So what it does is it gives you a probability, but it's not a diagnostic tool, right? So it sort of says if I take 1,000 people who check 5 of these 9 boxes, there's an 80% chance that these people will have depression, for example. So it's a probabilistic tool. And that's what makes things really, really hard. And the other thing about DSM criteria is that they tend to be like subtle and nuanced. There's also a bunch of stuff that's not, that's a part of DSM criteria that you'll never see on TikTok. So for example, if you're talking about major depressive disorder, you have to have symptoms for at least 2 weeks. So the single most thing that is absent from most of the social media analysis of mental health is the duration of symptoms and the frequency of symptoms. It's the time dimension. What everyone talks about is like the actual symptom or what is emotionally relatable without talking about duration and frequency and intensity and stuff like that. And that's a huge part of the DSM. It's like, oh, I'm sad today. Does that make you like clinical depression? Does that mean you have MDD? No. It has to be present for at least 2 weeks. Yeah, so this is the problem. So this is good in a sense, right? So I think this person's trying to educate people and stuff like that. That's pretty cool. But I think that the challenge here is that each of these symptoms has a differential, right? So like this is what I think is kind of a little bit problematic about this kind of, this is why diagnosis, I don't know if this is what this was supposed to turn into, but it's what it's turning into. So what we're going to do is take a look at, we're going to explain some basics about diagnosis today, okay? So this is the basic problem with like social media and mental health stuff. So now let's look at this. Here's the problem with this. So this is good in a sense. So if we look at ADHD at work, and people who struggle with time management, could they have ADHD? Yes, that is correct. It's accurate. Do they struggle with deadlines? Yes, that is accurate. Can they get into arguments at work? Yes, that is accurate. And I don't really blame these people for doing this. I think they're trying to spread awareness and stuff. But the problem is that in medicine, we have a differential diagnosis. So what that means is that there's a bunch of other stuff. So let's say I'm a narcissistic asshole. Am I going to have problems with time management at work? Very possibly, because I don't really care about showing up to meetings because I don't care about other people. Deadlines. If it's not important to me, then like, who cares about that? Do I get into arguments at work? Absolutely. Now let's look at other substance use. Let's say I am addicted to opiates. Could I have trouble with time management? Absolutely. Could I miss deadlines at work? Absolutely. Could I get into arguments? Absolutely. Right? And like the list goes on. Like it doesn't even have to be medical stuff. It's like, what if I'm mentally checked out? And don't give a fuck. A problem with time management? Sure. Do I miss deadlines? Sure. Do I get into arguments with people at work? Absolutely. So here's the challenge, right? So I think that like this is the problem, the fundamental problem with this kind of mental health information is that you can check the boxes and the person's right. Like those are common manifestations. It's also really interesting that they included arguments. So for example, let's go into this for a second because I think this is actually really cool. An underappreciated symptom of ADHD is attentional problems within conversation. So a lot of the workplace conflict that I see with people with ADHD is they're having a conversation. Someone is like, hey, can you make sure you mail that out before the end of the day? And you're distracted, so you say, yeah, sure. And then you don't do it. And then they get pissed at you the next day because you're not attending to the conversation. And this also manifests as what people think forgetfulness. But it's not that you're forgetful. It's that it never sank in the first place. You have no problem with recall. It's that you weren't attending to that information when it came in. So I think it's cool because this person is sort of highlighting that it's not just executive function things. It's not time management and deadlines and stuff like that. The other interesting thing, which we won't go into, is there's even some contrary research that shows that people with ADHD actually respond better in situations with deadlines and crises. So if you have ADHD, for example, I've seen that a lot of people work really well in real estate with ADHD because they actually have tons of crises and deadlines. And that somehow like keeps them motivated to like, and strangely enough, they're not like fully organized. I don't know if y'all have like seen like real estate people who aren't fully organized, but they kind of like show up and, you know, they kind of get things done and stuff like that. It's kind of weird. But I think, you know, when y'all are watching stuff on TikTok, like it's cool to sort of relate to this. And the problem is that doesn't mean that you have ADHD because there could be all kinds of other things that could be going on as well.
Psychology Hacks Part 54. If two people are arguing, stand between them and eat something. It'll help alleviate the tension. When you want to motivate yourself, ask will I instead of saying I will. This makes you want to do it more. If you want someone to be honest, ask them questions at night. People open up when they're tired.
Wait, what?
Psychology Hacks Part 54. If two people are arguing, stand between them and eat.
Stand between them and eat something? So, I mean, that could be true, right? But I don't know if you want to do that. Like, I'm confused. Like, if my parents are having a fight, is this person suggesting that I stand between my parents and start eating food? I mean, I know it works. So there's validity to this. I'm not saying it's not it, right? So like generally speaking, when people are angry with each other, there's a lot of eye contact. There's body language. You can kind of disrupt that by standing between them and disrupting the eye contact and body language. But I'm not sure. There's also a lot of stuff around eating, which I think is actually pretty good here, because eating is kind of a general. So there's this other thing from. Just something you learn in residency is it's hard for people to be pissed at you when you guys are eating something together. So when people were like mad at me, oftentimes we'd start with like food, like in the emergency room. It's like, hey man, do you want to eat something? They're like, nah. It's like, here, like have a cracker. Like I'll have a cracker. You have a cracker. You're eating. You're kind of like, it kind of disrupts the flow of things. It's not, I just don't know that, I don't know how practical this is. Like, are you walking around with a piece of apple to just stand between people when they're arguing?
Something. It'll help alleviate the tension. When you want to motivate yourself, ask will I instead of saying I will.
I don't know if I agree with that one. When you want to motivate yourself, ask will I instead of I will. But what if the answer is no? Right? I'm not sure about that. So this could be also touching on motivational interviewing. And, you know, like, so in motivational interviewing, we know that telling people to do things before they're ready is bad. So forcing people to commit to things when they're not ready to commit tends to be a mistake. What's more effective is asking them, because then you're trying to get a sense of what their internal conflict is. So this is kind of good because it touches on ambivalence, which is like, you know, before I commit to something, I'm conflicted, right? So conflict comes before commitment. And that internal conflict, one of the ways in motivational interviewing that we address that internal conflict is by asking people like open-ended questions about, okay, are you going to study today? Why or why not? And then as people think through why they may or may not study, that does actually move them towards motivation. So there could be some sense of this that is correct. But I don't know that just asking yourself, will I, is more motivating than I will. Because I've seen the opposite too, which is later on when you get into, you know, like later stages of like addiction recovery and stuff, you don't want to ask yourself, will I have a drink today? You want to say like, I ain't going to have a drink today. Come hell or high water. It ain't going to happen. So at some point you want to commit, but there's some value to this. It's interesting.
This makes you want to do it more. If you want.
I don't think that's true. It depends on where you are cognitively.
someone to be honest, ask them questions at night. People open up when they're tired.
That could be somewhat true too. So people are sometimes disinhibited when they are tired. And when they are disinhibited, you may get different answers that may be less covered by their inhibitions. But there are a couple of important assumptions there. The first is that assuming people are tired at night, which is like, I'm not sure if that's the case. Like maybe ask them first thing in the morning. And I don't, the other thing is that you're going to get, just because the answer is disinhibited does not mean that it is a better answer. So for example, like our inhibitions are a very, very important part of our social functioning. And so this is where, I don't know how to say this, but like the world thrives on inhibited people being able to talk to each other. So I don't know that you actually want to do that, but I mean, it's true that people are sometimes disinhibited when they're tired.
Here's a dark psychology trick to make anybody fall in love with you. This is 100% manipulation. I do not recommend doing this to anybody because it is super toxic, and I'm only making a video on it so you can at least be aware if it's happening to you. It's just a 3-step hot and cold technique where you first have to build up a pattern of pleasure and validation, just making this person feel amazing around you. And then you have to break it. Emotionally and physically, you have to pull away from them because this is going to make them feel insecure, like shit, and most importantly, the need to chase and get that validation back from you that they just got addicted to. And then you just have to turn that on button back on again and start validating them. This is going to make them fall in love with you, but in a very unhealthy attachment style. You know, until they figure out what the fuck you're doing. Good luck.
So that is woefully incorrect. So let's talk about this for a second. This may work, but here's the biggest issue.
Here's a dark psychology trick to make...
is the word anybody. This isn't going to work on anybody. This is going to work on a very, very small percentage of people that are insecure and can be manipulated by overt validation, which maybe that's a larger percentage of the population than I expect, especially if this is TikTok. I don't know. But I think, so here's the general principle is true. If you take someone who's woefully insecure and you are really, really nice to them and validate them a lot, they may really appreciate that. And then if you start being mean to them, they may dislike you and try to get that validation back, which is sort of true. And I think the person mentioned insecure attachment, which is what this sort of sounds like. But I don't think this is going to work on anyone. So let's just think through this critically for a second, okay? If someone walks up to you and starts just saying all these wonderful, nice things about you, and then they start calling you names a little while afterward, like, what are you going to do? Are you going to try to get into their good graces again? If you're like me, you're going to be like, first of all, when someone comes in, you're like, oh my God, you're such an amazing person. Oh my God, that's so awesome. You're so handsome and beautiful and intelligent and all that kind of stuff. My first thought is, what are you trying to sell me? You know, like, so I think this works if someone, here's the biggest problem with, I think, a lot of this psychology stuff is that there's an assumption that people are monolithic psychologically. Like that we're like, it's like, we're not like motherboards where you can just plug something in and it has a particular effect. Like, yeah, if you have someone who's very insecure and you start validating them, they will like that. And then if you're mean to them, they will dislike it and they may try to get into your good graces. But that starts with a very particular kind of person. So I don't know that, sure, it's manipulative. And I think people do that, right? So this is what people will learn, these patterns. They'll learn, like, especially if you've grown up in an abusive relationship, if this was done to you, you learn how to do it to other people, which is like, I'm going to be hot, warm, and cold. And then what happens when you do that, because there is value to that, it sort of teaches people that it's almost like a random reinforcement schedule. And so if you create a random reinforcement schedule, it encourages behavior. So if you're like nice to people one day and mean to people another day, that can actually encourage them, that shapes their behavior more powerfully than if you're nice to them, you know, every single day in a weird way. There's a certain arbitrariness that can encourage a particular kind of behavior. The problem is that this only works on people who like lack some fundamental amount of security in themselves. Because if people are like fundamentally secure, they're going to be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, this person's crazy. You know, I don't understand what's going on. And it's like a gambling machine works. Excellent. So I think it can work, but it's not going to work on anyone. It's just going to work on people who are insecure. And, you know, that it's just weird. I don't know. Yeah, so like workaholic parents is like another good example of, just people that, they'll treat their kids really nice one day, won't treat them well the next day. Like sometimes you get mommy and daddy's attention and sometimes you don't get mommy and daddy's attention, which can really exacerbate certain kinds of acting out behaviors. And I also don't know. I mean, this person says fall in love with you. I don't think that they're falling in love with you. I think you're emotionally manipulating them, sure. But I don't know what is going to happen. And like they kind of said, this is kind of accurate, that it's like, it's an unhealthy kind of love because it's not love. It's some weird, I don't think that you want to be in that situation it just doesn't, because if you want any kind of real relationship with this person, like what's the foundation of your relationship? I don't think it's going to grow into anything. It's just going to be toxic. I mean, I do think that it's the general principle of validating people who are insecure to get them to like you is like correct. I don't know that they're going to like you. I mean, hopefully they'll appreciate you as a human being. And then it's founded on their own emotional security. So there's like, it's sort of like saying, if you want to get someone who's starving to like you, start feeding them and then stop feeding them. And then they'll do whatever they can to get you to feed them again. It's like, yeah, that's kind of correct. But that assumes that the person is starving to begin with and has no other place to get food, right? It's like, if you're the only source of emotional validation from someone who's insecure, then they can become dependent on you. It's not wrong. It's just, I don't know what the utility of it is.